Called me the safe bet, which sounds like a compliment until you realize what they actually meant was boring. Predictable. Not enough. I was 31 years old, sitting at my sister's dining table, cutting a piece of roast chicken I'd spent 3 hours marinating, while her husband's colleagues talked about their investment portfolios, and I quietly calculated whether I had enough in checking to cover my car insurance that Friday. I didn't say anything. I smiled. I passed the breadbasket. That's what I always did. My name is Avery. I'm a middle school reading specialist at a Title I school in Columbus, Ohio. I make $43,000 a year. I have a studio apartment 20 minutes from work, a 12-year-old Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it, and a savings account I'm genuinely proud of, even though, by my family standards, it might as well be a piggy bank. My sister Claudine married a man named Preston 3 years ago. Preston works in commercial real estate. He does well, very well. The kind of well where he doesn't mention numbers because he doesn't have to. Claudine had always been the ambitious one. She got her MBA at 27, bought a house at 29, and hosted dinner parties where the wine cost more than my monthly electricity bill. I was happy for her. I genuinely was. What I was not prepared for was becoming the punchline of those dinner parties. It started small, the way these things usually do. A comment here. A look there. Claudine mentioning, almost in passing, to one of Preston's friends, "Oh, Avery's in education. You know how that goes." A little laugh, a knowing nod, and I'd sit there smiling like I'd agreed to something when really I was just too shocked to respond. I'd grown up in the same house as Claudine. We had the same parents, went to the same church, ate the same Sunday dinners, but somewhere along the way, Claudine had decided that my life, the one I had quietly and carefully built, was something to be managed in conversation. Softened. Minimized. Like she was doing me a favor by not drawing too much attention to it. My parents weren't much better. My mom had this way of talking about me that felt like a disclaimer. Avery's always been our creative one. She cares about the kids. As if caring about something was a consolation prize for not caring about money. My dad mostly just nodded at whatever Claudine said. He'd been nodding at Claudine since 1998. For a long time, I told myself it wasn't that serious. Then came Thanksgiving. Preston's older brother and his wife were visiting from Scottsdale, successful people, the kind who fly home for the holidays instead of driving. Claudine had been preparing for this dinner for 2 weeks. I know because she called me 4 times to ask if I could make my cornbread, my sweet potato casserole, and my cranberry sauce from scratch, because you're so good at the homemade stuff. I took a day off work. I bought the ingredients. I drove 40 minutes to Claudine's house and spent 6 hours in her kitchen while she changed outfits and Preston arranged the good wine glasses. Nobody asked if I needed help. When the guests arrived, the conversation moved the way it always does in rooms like that: jobs, properties, vacation plans. Preston's brother mentioned something about a ski house in Park City they'd just purchased. His wife talked about a boutique hotel she'd invested in. Claudine chimed in about their own plans to flip a property in the short north. Then someone turned to me. "And what is it you do, Avery?" I told them. "Reading specialist, Title I school, Columbus." There was a pause. A small one, but I've learned to read pauses the way I read my students' faces. Everything is in what's not being said. Claudine jumped in. Avery's always been the heart of the family. She smiled warmly at me, the kind of smile that's really an apology. She's not really about the money stuff. She just loves what she does. Not really about the money stuff. I kept my face still. I picked up my fork. I ate the cranberry sauce I had made from actual cranberries. Preston's brother said, "That's sweet. Good for you." And then he turned back to Preston and they started talking about cap rates. I thought about that moment for weeks. Not obsessively. I had papers to grade and IEP meetings and a student who was reading at a 3rd grade level and needed me present, not distracted by my sister's dinner parties. But it stayed with me. The way Claudine had so smoothly stepped in, the way she'd framed my entire life as something wholesome but small. Heart of the family. Not really about the money. Like I was a golden retriever. Sweet. Harmless. Not quite at the table. I didn't bring it up. I never did, with Claudine. There's a particular dynamic in families where one person has been assigned the role of the unbothered one. the easygoing one, the one who doesn't make things weird. And if you've been playing that role for 31 years, speaking up feels like breaking a contract nobody ever asked you to sign. So I didn't say anything. But I started paying attention. I started noticing the pattern in a way I hadn't let myself before. The way my mom would tell relatives that Claudine was really thriving and then describe me as figuring out her next chapter. Even though I had been in the same career for 6 years and had no intention of changing it, the way Claudine would ask me to bring things to family events, homemade things, time-consuming things, and then accept the compliments from guests without mentioning who made them. The way Preston would make a comment like, must be nice to have zero stress about my job, as if teaching 23, 11-year-olds to read while managing behavioral plans and communicating with parents and running intervention groups was a spa retreat. And then there was the money thing. I found out from my aunt, not from my parents, that my dad had co-signed a loan for Claudine and Preston's rental property. $40,000. He'd used his retirement savings as collateral. I'm not saying my parents owed me anything. I'm not saying they should have told me, but I'd asked my dad, the previous year, if he could help me with a portion of my graduate school tuition. I was finishing my master's, paying mostly out of pocket, and he'd said, gently, that they just didn't have the flexibility right now. I processed that information the way I process most things that hurt. Quietly, in my car, in the parking lot of a Walgreens, before I drove home and made dinner. I didn't say anything. But I opened a note on my phone, and I started writing things down. Not dramatically, not with any plan in mind. It was just, I had learned somewhere in my training that documentation matters. That when you're trying to understand a pattern, you write down the data points. So I did. Dates, comments. Who said what? I didn't know what I would ever do with it. I just knew that having it made me feel less like I was imagining things. The next several months were ordinary. I finished my master's degree in May. I walked across a stage at Ohio State and accepted a diploma that I had funded almost entirely by myself. Federal loans, a small scholarship, and 3 years of careful budgeting. My parents came to the ceremony. Claudine didn't. She and Preston were closing on the rental property that weekend. My mom took a photo of me in my cap and gown, on her phone, in front of the building. It was a little blurry. Nobody posted it anywhere. I drove home and ordered Thai food and gave myself one evening to feel whatever I was feeling, which was mostly a complicated mix of proud and tired and something I couldn't quite name yet. Then I went back to work. Summer came. Claudine texted me in July to ask if I'd be willing to help with her annual 4th of July party. She hosted it every year. Backyard, string lights, catered apps, the whole thing. And every year, she asked me to make a few things because people always ask about your food. Potato salad, a berry trifle, lemonade from scratch. That year I said yes, same as always. I'm not sure what I was expecting to be different. The party was on a Saturday. I arrived 2 hours early to set up the food. Claudine greeted me at the door, glanced at the containers I was carrying and said, "Oh, perfect, just put those in the kitchen." Then she went back to arranging flowers. The guests arrived. People ate the potato salad. Someone told Claudine it was incredible, and she said, "I know, it's so good, right?" No correction. I was standing 6 feet away. I heard it. I didn't say anything. I helped clear plates when the meal wound down. I refilled lemonade. At some point, I overheard Claudine talking to a group of her friends about a trip to Portugal she and Preston were planning. Lisbon, the Algarve, 10 days. One of her friends asked about a house sitter. Claudine glanced across the yard and found me with her eyes. "My sister might be able to help," she said. "She's pretty flexible." Flexible, because I'm a teacher with summers off, which apparently translates to available. I smiled from across the yard. It was reflex by then. But that evening, on the drive home, something shifted. I'd been keeping that note on my phone for about 7 months. It had 43 entries. I read through them in my parking lot before I went inside. 43 moments. 43 times I had been minimized, spoken over, used as a prop, or simply edited out of my own story while still being useful enough to provide labor. I closed the note. I sat there for a minute, and I thought about my students, the ones who come in reading 2 grade levels behind, the ones other teachers have quietly written off, The ones who just need someone to look at them and say, I see what you're capable of. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I thought, I have been allowing my family to read me at the wrong level for a very long time. I spent the rest of the summer working. I also spent it preparing. I'd started taking an online course in personal finance, partly out of genuine interest, partly because I was tired of feeling like money was a language I wasn't allowed to speak. I opened a high-yield savings account. I started a Roth IRA. I paid off the last of my smaller student loan 3 months ahead of schedule, and I sat with that confirmation email for longer than was probably reasonable. I also consulted a family law attorney about something I'd been sitting on, because here's what I hadn't told anyone. What I had mentioned to no one in my family, what I had held quietly for 4 months, my dad had added Claudine's name to a joint account, an account that had originally been set up in both my name and his when I was in college. A small account, a few $1,000s, something he'd started to help me cover emergencies while I was getting on my feet. When I'd checked it in March, after not thinking about it for a while, my name was gone. Claudine's was there instead. I had not been told. I had not been asked. I had simply been removed. I called my bank. They confirmed the change had been made 18 months ago. I asked how. The documentation on file showed a form with my signature authorizing the change. I had never signed that form. I printed everything. I went to the attorney. She was a small woman with very direct eyes, and she listened to me explain the whole thing, the account, the form, the signature. And then she said, calmly, that's fraud. She helped me understand my options. I could file a complaint. I could pursue civil action. I could contact the bank's fraud department and initiate a formal investigation. Or I could, she said, have a conversation with my family first, with documentation in hand. I chose the conversation. Claudine's birthday was in October. Every year, the family gathered for it. My parents, a few aunts and uncles, Claudine's in-laws, and me. It was always at the house. Claudine liked having people come to her. I said I would come. I brought a gift, a book I thought she might actually like, wrapped nicely, with a card I wrote myself. And I brought a folder. Inside the folder, a copy of the original account documents with my name on them, a copy of the bank's records showing the name change, a copy of the form on file, the one with my signature, which I had never signed, a letter from my attorney laying out what this constituted under Ohio law, and one last thing, a printed spreadsheet. The spreadsheet was simple, 2 columns. On the left, a list of everything I had contributed to this family over the past 5 years. Homemade meals for events, hours of labor, the time I'd driven my mom to her cardiology appointment twice because Claudine was busy, the money I'd spent on ingredients that were never reimbursed, the house sitting I'd done for 8 days while they were in Portugal, which, yes, I had agreed to in the end because I'm still working on that reflex. On the right column, a dollar value. Researched. Fair market rate. I wasn't there to make a scene. I want to be clear about that. I'm not someone who wants to blow up a room full of people on a birthday. But I had spent 31 years being quiet, and I needed my family to hear me. Not feel sorry for me, not defend themselves, not explain, just hear me. I arrived when the gathering was already in motion. Claudine's mother-in-law was there. 2 aunts, my parents. Preston's golf friend, whose name I can never remember. Claudine greeted me at the door. She said, "You look nice," which is what she says when she's in a good mood and trying. We sat down to dinner. The conversation moved the usual way. Preston talked about the rental property. They'd found tenants. It was going well. My dad nodded. My mom asked questions. One of the aunts asked about Portugal, and Claudine lit up talking about it. At some point, someone asked about me. One of my aunts, the good one, the one who actually listens, said, "Avery, how's school? You finished that master's?" "I did," I said, "in May." "That's wonderful," she said, and she meant it. Claudine said, "Yeah, Avery's been busy with her little projects." She said it fondly, the way you'd describe a hobby. I set down my fork. "I want to talk about something," I said. "I'd like everyone to hear it." The table went quiet the way tables do when someone says something that doesn't fit the usual script. I opened the folder. I put the bank documents in front of my parents. I explained, without raising my voice, what I had found. The account. The signature. The form I had never signed. My mom said, "I don't understand." My dad didn't say anything. I looked at my dad. I said, "I'm not angry about the money. I need you to understand that. But I need to know how my name ended up removed from an account without my consent. And I need to know if you understand what that means legally." Claudine said, "Avery, this isn't the time." "I made potato salad for your 4th of July party," I said. "And someone told you it was incredible and you said thank you." I said it quietly, not with anger, just factually. "I've been making things for this family for a long time. I want you to see what that looks like." I put the spreadsheet on the table. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then my aunt, the good one, picked it up. She read it. She was quiet. Then she said, "Avery." "I'm not leaving," I said. "I'm not cutting anyone off. I'm not looking for a fight. I need to stop being the person in this family who is useful and invisible at the same time." Preston started to say something about the account being a misunderstanding. I slid the attorney's letter across the table. "My attorney explained what it is," I said. "I'd like to resolve it without involving the bank's fraud department. That's up to you." The rest of the evening was not warm. People ate cake without much conversation. My aunt hugged me before she left and didn't let go for a few seconds longer than usual. My mom cried quietly in the kitchen and I stood with her for a minute, not apologizing, just present. Before I left, my dad stopped me at the door. He looked older than I'd noticed lately. He said, "I didn't know that's how you felt." "I know," I said. "That's kind of the point." I drove home in the dark. I didn't cry. I wasn't happy exactly. I was something more like steady. The way you feel after you finally said the true thing out loud. And the world doesn't end. My dad called 3 days later. He said he wanted to fix the account. He said he was sorry. He didn't explain the signature. And I didn't push. My attorney had advised me to let the bank's process handle that part, which it is still doing. Claudine texted me a week after the birthday. She said, "I didn't know you felt that way. And then I should have said it was your potato salad. It was such a small thing. And it was also, somehow, the right thing to say." I didn't respond immediately. I thought about it for 2 days. Then I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I'd like to try to do this differently. I don't know what happens next. Families don't transform overnight. Patterns that took 30 years to build don't dissolve because someone placed a folder on a birthday dinner table. I know that, but here's what I also know. I have a master's degree I paid for myself. I have students who came to me reading at a 3rd grade level and left reading chapter books. I have a Roth IRA and a high-yield savings account and a studio apartment that is small and mine. I have 43 documented data points that helped me understand I wasn't imagining things. And I have learned, slowly the way my students learn, with setbacks and patience and a lot of practice, that being the quiet one in a room doesn't mean you don't have anything to say. It just means that when you finally say it, everyone is very surprised. They should not have been surprised. I've been paying attention for a long time. I used to think silence was the same as peace, that if I didn't make things uncomfortable, things would eventually get better on their own, that patience was a virtue and keeping the harmony was worth the cost. What I didn't understand, not for a long time, was the difference between choosing silence and being trained into it. There's a version of quiet that comes from strength, from knowing when a moment isn't worth your energy. And then there's the version I was living, the kind that comes from years of being told, in ways both direct and invisible, that your discomfort doesn't quite warrant the disruption. Claudine didn't set out to harm me. I actually believe that. She didn't wake up one morning and decide her sister's life would make a useful prop at dinner parties. It was more gradual than that and more human, a slow accumulation of choices made by someone who had learned that the world rewards performance, and that I, reliably, would not make a scene. That's how these things work. Not with one dramatic betrayal, but with 43 small ones, each reasonable enough on its own, each easy enough to excuse, until you sit in a parking lot one night and read through a year's worth of notes and realize the shape of what's been happening. What changed for me wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. The moment I put the folder on that table, I wasn't operating from fury, I was operating from clarity. There's a real difference. Fury wants to burn something down. Clarity just wants to be seen accurately. I think about my students sometimes when I think about this. The ones who come in already convinced they're bad at reading, already braced for failure, because enough people in their lives communicated, not always in words, that certain things weren't really for them. My job every single day is to interrupt that story, to say the assessment you received was wrong. Let me show you what you're actually capable of. I had to do that for myself, too. And it took longer than it should have. Here's what I know about how things actually unfold. When you look at them honestly, actions have weight, not mystical weight. When you consistently take from someone without acknowledgement, you don't just take the thing, you take their sense of what they deserve. And when someone finally reclaims that, quietly, with documentation, with a calm voice at a birthday dinner, the discomfort in that room isn't punishment. It's just the natural result of a long imbalance finally being named. My dad said he didn't know how I felt, and I believe him. But I also think, on some level, he didn't ask. None of them asked. Because I had made it very easy not to. That's the thing I carry forward. Not bitterness. I'm genuinely not interested in holding on to that. But a commitment to making it harder for people to misread me, to saying the true thing earlier, before it takes 43 entries in a phone note to feel justified. To understanding that clarity offered kindly, at the right moment, is not cruelty. It's the only real foundation any relationship can be built on. I have a folder. I have a spreadsheet. I have a studio apartment that is small and entirely mine. And I have, finally, a much more accurate sense of what I'm worth, which turns out to have very little to do with anyone else's dinner party.